Colleagues, I think we can, in the interest of time, start our session. So allow me to call on the stage the panelist, Mr. Pierre Celestin Rwabukumba, the president of the African Security Exchange Association, Mr. John Bosco Sebabi, the deputy CEO of the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, the PAPS, and Dr. Jide Okeke, the coordinator, UNDP Regional Program for Africa. So thank you very much once again, and good morning. Welcome to this extremely important panel on one of the critical issues of our time, because we are speaking about the strategic role of capital markets and the Africa Credit Rating Agency. Just to give a bit of background, you are certainly familiar with the African Union decisions that have created, or that are supposed to be creating, the African financial institutions, which are the African Union Central Bank, the African Investment Bank, the Pan-African Stock, the African Monetary Fund, and later on the Pan-African Stock Exchange, which is part of that architecture of financial institutions in the continent. The very important role of this institution cannot be overemphasized, because these institutions are supposed to support economic integration, but also push the agenda of the continent with regards to achieving inclusive growth and sustainable development. And when we look at the statistics today, it is noted that African countries should accelerate their capacities in terms of economic growth and development. And in that perspective, these institutions are really critical. The super panel that we have today, and you can see that they are truly the people to talk to because of their positions in their respective institutions, but also in terms of the work that those institutions are playing in framing the narrative of a transformed continent. When we look at that ecosystem, we are looking forward to see these institutions, supporting financing in the continent, and this is absolutely critical at a time when our continent is supposed to mobilize approximately 70% of the resources domestically to finance its development. So, without any further development, I would like to open the panel and to introduce our excellent panelists. Let me start with Mr. Pierre Celestin Rwabukumba, the president of the African Securities Exchange Association. The first thing we want to know is, what is the association doing for the continent, and how can this important project, which is aimed at accelerating progress towards the Pan-African Stock Exchange, is addressing the issues of financing in the continent and shaping the narrative of inclusive growth? You have the floor for your remarks.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me. As you said, we are an association of the securities exchanges, the stock exchanges of the continent, and other infrastructure providers. There are many of us on the continent. And the main reason why we have created, now it's been 30 years plus, that our umbrella organization has been created. It was basically to do what you are saying, to speak the same language, to learn from each other, but most importantly, to support the flow of investments across our markets and countries. As, of course, stock exchanges, normally they are an engine of different economies. In advanced economies, they are the backbone, actually, the main platform for raising financing for those economies. Unfortunately, in our continent, it's not the same. So we've been working hard to make sure at least we play a bigger role in our economies, because we are not the main source of financing, especially for long term, which is the main reason why in other markets it happens that way. So there are many structural issues that are going on. We have that in our economies and markets across the continent. The issues are pretty much almost the same. The main one being that our people are not saving enough. That's number one, which is a catalyst normally of any market to thrive. That leads to low liquidity in our markets. We are so fragmented, and the other issues revolve around financial literacy and so on. So there are so many issues that we have, but we can't keep talking about issues. We have to look for solutions. So I think that's why we are talking about Pan-African institutions that can help. So what we are doing at the ASEA level, we are supporting those ideas that are coming around to support Pan-African business, cross-border trading. We have PAPs here. That is about payment systems across the continent. We are now talking even about a credit rating agency for the continent. Of course, we will discuss a bit more about it today. And the many more other projects we are running, like harmonizing our own legal frameworks across the continent, again, to be able to speak the same language and to be able to use the same or similar platforms that other people have used successfully to develop their countries. So I think, in a nutshell, that's what I could say for now. Pause here, we keep talking later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But there is something that you said in terms of mobilizing long-term financing, and you know that it is certainly one of the most important challenges that we are facing in the continent, to mobilize long-term financing. So what is the association doing? And when you talk about the project, the linkage project, how many securities have you already brought together? And what are the perspectives, in terms of the way forward?
For the linkage project, it's called the ELP. It's the Africa Exchanges Linkage Project. It's a platform that we are using we have put together to link. Our target normally is to have at least 15 stock exchanges, the major ones. We have already about 10 which are linked already, and the phase 2 we are looking to onboard another 3 at least. So the project is meant to link the existing. To link the existing means that no African country which has a stock exchange has agreed to merge with any other. So basically, the legal frameworks are not the same, the players are not the same, but we have to start somewhere. So in other markets, if you go to West Africa, for example, where we are sitting today, we have BRVM. So BRVM is called a regional La Bourse de Valeurs Mobilières, right? So it's called a regional stock exchange, brings together at least 8 countries where people can raise money. So it's only one platform, but the continent is so wide, 51 countries, 3 or 4 languages people are talking. So no one has really agreed to come up with one infrastructure. But what we have at least compromised about is to at least make sure that an investor in Kenya can be able to access securities in Ivory Coast without having to necessarily call a broker in Abidjan. So the ELP project actually is an infrastructure which is linking the existing stock exchange infrastructure using the current systems in different markets where people can access securities via a sponsored a membership, basically. Brokers, the intermediaries in Ivory Coast or Kenya or South Africa can be able to access different markets and view them, but so can the companies be able to do regional IPOs. We've had a recent IPO in the most recent, actually the youngest stock exchange on the continent, but I see it as a giant in the coming future. That is Ethiopia Stock Exchange, Securities Exchange, actually. It was launched in January. So they were doing an IPO which can crash any of our small markets. You know, so now if you want to do an IPO of $300 million in our markets, you need your neighbors. In small markets, of course, I'm not talking about South Africa or the bigger markets, but the point is that, you know, this infrastructure is not just coming as an infrastructure. It's a platform, it's a tool that we are meant to use to be able to help both sides of the coin. That is the investors who want to access different markets, but that also is for the issuers out there, even the governments who want to issue securities in their own countries, they would be able to use that platform without necessarily all the time wanting to do, if you want to do a Eurobond, you have to go to London. Why? When our pension sector, people have lots of money, lots of cash, putting in real estate. So I think that's what the ELP is meant to do. And other infrastructure around it. PAPS, we are partners with PAPS of Afreximbank. I think Bosco will have time to talk about PAPS because at the end of the day, you need to settle in different currencies. Again, we don't have our own euro for Africa, you know, or a dollar for African countries. So we have to settle in different currencies, which is a problem. And I think projects like PAPS can chip in on that one probably, but that's what we are doing on that particular project in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. Now, in terms of innovative financing, and I am very happy that you were able to allude to the Pan-African payment and settlement systems, which in our perspective at the African Union is responding to one of the important challenges that we are facing to make sure that, you know, cross-border transactions are smoothened and that there is seamless flow of financial resources within the continent. Mr. Bosco, when we talk about the Pan-African payment and settlement system, we see that it is, you know, a platform that will allow our countries to be able to facilitate trade among themselves. And we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a market that brings together 55 African countries, and also a market with a potential that is extremely important, because if we look at the size of the population of the AFCFTA, we see that the data are, you know, underlining that it is a market of 1.4 billion people today, which is the equivalent of the population of China and the equivalent population of India. But in just 2 decades, the market will be approximately a market of 2.7 billion people. So what can PAPS do, and what are you doing to make sure that we shape the narrative of a transformed Africa with our own resources, you know, using our own platforms? And what do you see as opportunities that the Pan-African payment and settlement system can bring to the table to make sure that we create the space for a transformed continent? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning all. Doctor, thank you very much for bringing me into this kind of discussion. And this, let me give it context, because once we talk about payment systems, many of us may not get it at the outset. So yesterday in the afternoon here, we discussed efficient and integrated financial systems. Now, an efficient and integrated financial system, well, it's a network of institutions, and markets, and infrastructure. It must be able to mobilize savings, allocate capital markets, and transmit payments. So this means that you must have efficient capital markets and the stock exchanges, and also have an efficient payment system. So these three are the ingredients or the foundations of an efficient financial system. Now, let me talk about the role of a payment. Payments is the plumbing of economic activity, because any economic activity involves either buying or selling. So either you're sending money or funds, or you're receiving. So the payment system must support an efficient flow of funds from one end to from the buyers to the sellers. So this is a basic principle. At the outset of setting up the African Continental Free Trade Area and signing of the agreement, the heads of state saw it appropriate to have a Pan-African payment system. Just like we're talking about a Pan-African stock exchange, a Pan-African central bank, and all that. So the payment system to facilitate trade in this area. Now, what's the hurdle? The hurdle that there is that, yes, Africa is 1.4 billion people, same size or same population as India probably, and maybe slightly less than China. But the difference is that it's fragmented. My colleague talked about the fragmentation in stock exchanges. Now, this fragmentation is also even payments. So that means that if I'm supposed to buy a stock, I'm in Zimbabwe, supposed to buy a stock in Nairobi. One, I'll have to approach a stockbroker, whether in Harare, to coordinate with our Nairobi. Now, to send a payment also will take a couple of days. So the SFTA cannot only support the individual goods and goods only to travel from one country to the other, but also the stocks to be sold. That means to mobilize the resources from where they are available and where the savers want to invest and where the investments are available. So because we have 55 or so many fragmented states and stock exchanges, we need to have a payment system that can link all these countries. Secondly, the currencies. If I'm supposed to buy a stock in Ethiopia and I'm in Zambia, that means I must look for a birr or the dollar to be able to do that. So what does the Pan-African Payment Settlement System do is that we have the infrastructure, we link cross-border payments, and these are able to be done in your own local currency. So what happens that you go to your bank and you, using any channel, online banking or digital bank, whichever channel you have, even mobile, and be able to send money to your counterpart in another country if they are all registered on PAPS. So PAPS has set up this infrastructure to be done, and we have now 15 countries on board. We have signed up 150 commercial banks, but we have about 90 of them who are technically connected to transact. However, in terms of what the linking stock exchanges we've done, we have a partnership with the African Stock Exchanges Association. We have looked at what the AELP, the linkage, that links a stock. So the African Exchanges Linkage Project is linking the stock management or selling and buying. Now we need to complement it with a payment side. So that means if I sell a stock, I receive my funds immediately. Now what does this do? Since PAPS is an instant payment system, and the AELP is linking the trading and selling of the stock. So if I sell a stock to you and you are in another country, that means the counter payment must also come instantly. So that is where we want to be. Now, if this is done in all our countries, the whole continent. You can imagine how much savings are we going to mobilize, how much liquidity are we going to provide to our stock exchanges and the capital markets, and then we become more self-sufficient as the African continent. So this is what PAPS is doing today. It's a journey. We are moving towards that goal with our colleagues in the stock exchanges to be able to make sure we don't support not only the goods, the selling of goods or the buying of goods across Africa, but also the selling and buying of stock and mobilizing resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a question that I truly want to ask you, and permit me to take the conversation there. Is PAPS really working? Because people sitting in the room would like to know, is it working? What have you achieved so far? And what can we do to make sure that it is effectively running, at the speed and the level that we are expecting?
Thank you very much for that question. I think I was itching for that kind of, for me to discuss that kind of approach. PAPS is working. PAPS started to operate in the WAMS region. I'm glad that director is there, Jawara. PAPS is operating in Ghana. Banks are using PAPS very well, and not only in the branches, but also on their mobile channel. So that means somebody in the comfort of their homes, in the comfort of their bedrooms, can send a payment across to Nigeria or to the Gambia. Now, everything needs scale up. So in the 6 countries, the operations are running. KCB in Kenya has just rolled PAPS on their mobile channel as well. You see, what we want to do is to make sure that payments are not done in the branches only. The branches are comfortable, but that means you have to wake up, dress up, drive the branch. We now go into the mobile channels. So KCB, Bank of Kigali in Rwanda, in Eastern Africa, have also, now the rest of the countries like Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi are signed up, the banks are signed up, and they should start the integrations to go on. So what you asked that, what can you do? The scaling up is not for I, as the Deputy CEO of PAPS, to go and put an infrastructure in place. But all of us, the central banks, the commercial banks, to sign up and then be able to send transactions through. Because a system that sends through 100 transactions can send through 1 million transactions. PAPS aims to solve 4 challenges of cross-border payments. Number 1 is access. Who is accessing the system? So our structure is that we have a tiered approach in terms of participation. We have central banks that come in. We have commercial banks that come also and do the settlements on their own behalf. Then we have fintechs. Fintechs is the future of the financial services, especially in Africa. If we see what mobile money has done to our people, then we understand this. So PAPS is also, we get fintechs, connect them to banks, and then they can operate through banks. So they have a settlement bank. So we solve the problem of access. The other is speed. It's an instant payment system. Third is cost. Now, PAPS, the lowest charge is $2, the highest is $12. Even if you're selling $1 million through equivalent, I'm just using $1 to be able to convert very well. The price is $12. So we aim to solve those 4 challenges of cross-border payment systems. And within West Africa, the West African Monetary Zone, we are operating very well. We just need scale up, more banks to come on board. We always take Ghana as the model. Ghana, 80% of their banks are on PAPS. And I think 5 of them, which is about maybe 20%, have rolled PAPS on their mobile channel. So that means you can transact. If you're a client of GCB, a kind of Fidelity, I guess, you can transact using your mobile on PAPS. So what PAPS needs is scaling up, is at the level of the Association of African Central Banks, just what we are doing with the Association of Stock Exchanges. we go into a partnership and everybody comes on board. That's when it can make sense. But if we leave it for only one region, one country, it doesn't make sense. Maybe let me end it with a roadmap we have. The roadmap now, what we are doing, we are having discussions with the BCAO and BSA. BSA and BCAO have 8 plus 6, it's about 14 countries. So we want to spread like that. We are also now piloting with, I think, Standard Bank. Yesterday they were here in South Africa. So that we come now southern, central, and west. And in the north, we also have Egypt that's on board, and Tunisia, and Morocco is coming. So we are spreading so that we can now have that impact that is desired and the impact that we are created to put in place or to have on the African continent. But to answer your question, the system works very well. And we project, in the agreements, we say the transaction goes through in 120 seconds, which is 2 minutes. However, in what we've done today and what we're doing today, we are averaging 7 to 12 seconds around there. So monies are sent instantly and received instantly. And then the settlement is the following day between the banks themselves. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, let me turn to you, Dr. Jide. You work for the UNDP, and recently you've seen the difficulties that African countries are facing to mobilize resources in the markets and also to access long-term financing. The UNDP has certainly been one of the institutions, that has stepped with African countries to try to create another narrative of credit rating in the continent. So how is UNDP contributing to effectively reversing the historical trend of persistent low credit rating among African countries? And how can you work with African countries to make sure that they are able to seize the opportunities that are for economic development, given the fact that we have the African Continental Free Trade Area? And what are the opportunities that you see in unlocking a new pathway for growth? The floor is yours.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Dr. Patrick, thank you so much to you and your team for this very timely panel discussion. Good morning to you all. Maybe to address the question, I would want to cluster my interventions across 4 key issues, which I think could steer a conversation today. The first is the context of African countries. It seems to me that the problem we're trying to solve is more about why are we penalizing the poor? I think that is really the fundamental problem we are trying to solve when we have the discourse around credit ratings. Who knows the only 2 countries in Africa that currently constitute investment grade as defined by the major credit rating agencies? There are only 2 of them, Mauritius and Botswana. And that is a very powerful evidence right there, that there is a correlation between countries with very low GDP per capita and the fact that some of these main credit agencies continue to penalize poor countries. And there is a paradox there. How is it that you're able to leapfrog, you're able to achieve middle income status, or in fact high income status, when you continue to borrow? The cost of borrowing remains very, very high. It simply means that you are further entrenched in poverty. And I think this is really an important point in terms of really trying to understand the problem. Now, from our side as UNDP, it brings me to the second point. Our approach is not to continue to criticize the structure of the global economy. I think what we have decided to do is to look inward. How can we strengthen the capacity of sovereign borrowers, our countries? Because of the theory of change that if we're able to build and upskill some of the government officials, their institutions, perhaps we can begin to have a serious and more deliberate conversation around how you can alter the methodology around credit ratings. So it is less about trying to challenge the credit rating agencies through arbitrary criticisms, but more about trying to build the capacity and capabilities of countries and government to be able to negotiate and have a frank conversation with credit rating agencies. I think this is the approach that we think is excellent. We think that it is going to, over time, it's not going to be immediate, it's going to be incremental. Over time, it is going to alter the methodology. And as we think about the establishment of the African Credit Rating Agency, I think UNDP would like to work very closely with the African Union to ensure that we are not just, it's not about radically transforming the methodology, but it's also about building the capacities of our countries. My third point is that in terms of the functional pillars that we have identified, so recently we, as UNDP, we established our credit ratings agency initiative, and we work on three important pillars. The first, most important, is that we have decided to establish what we refer to as a concilium of advisors. We do know that we can deploy technical assistance to countries. We started with only 4 advisors. Today we have 13. And if there are advisors in this room that are qualified, we'll be very happy to consider them, because this is a very niche area, and we really would want to benefit from the advisory support from those that have worked with some of these credit agencies in the past. The second point, which we want to do, is that we have already established a platform, because there's a need for constant research, constant data gathering, and knowledge production. And the last point is to establish a community of practice. My last point, which is the fourth, is that we also need to look at African financial institutions when it comes to borrowing. And I'm glad, I think I saw Anna walk into the room. And that's why we went into a partnership with the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions. Yesterday, we heard from the presentation on the Africa Economic Outlook that it is 500% less when you borrow money from African financial institutions. So it is not only about altering credit ratings, it is also about amplifying and strengthening how we engage with African financial institutions to better access finance. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was excellent. So I just want to understand what is the link that you do at UNDP between poor credit ratings and development? If you can just let us know your understanding and how we can try to work around this nexus to address the challenge that we are confronted with, because it comes with issues around the increased price of capital, because the price of capital grows up when you are poorly rated.
Excellent question, Patrick. I think I come into that conversation at 2 levels. The first is, I think we need to first move away from the reductionist notion around capital. Capital is not only linked to finance. I think as UNDP, we have a more comprehensive definition of how we define capital, including human capital. And I think there is a need for us to incrementally begin to quantify these other forms of what we will call soft capital as we decide or think about how to boost domestic capital resources for our countries. I think the second point is that we have seen, I think oftentimes when we talk about capital also, we have seen that we always look outside of the continent. But in our own experience as UNDP, we have seen that government is increasingly cost sharing with us when it comes to project implementation. And I can give you clear examples. In DRC, the government of DRC gave UNDP $130 million for a community resilience project to implement on their behalf. Right? In Senegal, they gave us something similar, over $100 million as well for the PUDC initiative there. And in Gabon recently, again, over $100 million. So there is an appreciation of institutions like UNDP to help deliver better for government. So it is not always the case that government lacks resources. I think what some of the government are increasingly yearning for is the ability to deliver better for citizens. And I think if they are able to find the right IPs that can do that for them, I think that is something that is important. My last point is that sometimes borrowing from at commercial rates is actually cheaper than borrowing from multilateral institutions. And the reason why I say that, and I know it's a bit provocative, the reason why I say that is that it is not so much about the interest rate in the real sense of it. It is what you do with that investment. It is, over time, what you're able to accumulate from the investment you're making. So it goes back to the point that was raised in the African Development Report yesterday, that if you get governance right, and governance delivers for citizens, it is likely that over time, the supposedly high cost of borrowing would deliver for the citizens in ways that the cost of borrowing is not going to, it will be overlooked. I think this is really a solid point to make, that sometimes this commercial, it is more about governance in terms of how we're able to deliver better. Thank you so much.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for that clear response. Allow me to move to the last but not the least panelist, Mr. Tierno Habib Anne, who is the CEO or Managing Director, as he said, the MD of Shelter Afrique, which is one of the multilateral financial institutions in the continent working on infrastructure development, urban infrastructure development. So the question to you, and considering the discussion that we just had with other panelists, when we look at the data, we see that the risk in terms of investment in infrastructure in Africa are absolutely low. We are at 1.4 estimated compared to other regions of the world. But unfortunately, when it comes to financing the infrastructure in Africa, you will see that we are paying the high cost in terms of the resources that we are mobilizing in markets. So what is Shelter Afrique doing, first of all, to change that narrative, which is a negative perception of what the continent can actually provide? That is the first. And secondly, how do you work with markets? How do you work with capital markets to mobilize more resources and channel them to urban development in the continent? Because we know that you are doing a lot. We've been seeing the impact and the footprint of your institution in recent years, and we would like to commend you for your excellent and able leadership on that. So how do you make sure that we mobilize resources to effectively respond to the challenge of building infrastructure and urbanizing our cities in Africa?
Thank you so much, Patrick. And first of all, apologies. I was held up in a meeting with a minister and I had to rush here. But pleasure to be here. So, Patrick, I think your question is very much key in the sense that the perception of risk on the continent of Africa is much higher than what it is actually, right? And I think this is really a question of narrative. It's a question of really being transparent about what is actually happening on the ground, because data, right, sometimes can be very misleading, right? So it depends how you collect the data, it depends what kind of data you are collecting, right? And it depends on who is collecting the data as well. So I think this whole initiative on the African Credit Rating Agency is very key. Last February, we were at the African Union under the leadership of the institution. We, as the African multilateral financial institutions, by the way, Shelter Afrique Development Bank is one of the founding members of the Alliance of African Multilaterals, so we're very happy that UNDP has signed up also with us. It's a young alliance that looks to really help that narrative. To your point, Patrick, it's ready to say exactly how things are on the ground. We are on the ground. Today we started at 7 institutions. Today we are 10. We started just a year ago, exactly, right? So it's growing, and these multilaterals are doing things on the continent, right? And the risk perception that other institutions that are not as active as ours on the continent needs to change, and that's the role of the alliance. And we have a strong secretariat that's also doing a great job for that. So that's just to address the risk perception. And really kind of linked to that, I wanted to give a quick example of the ratings, right? I mean, I think it's important for us to also understand how these rating agencies work, right? Because when you look at the difference between corporate rating and sovereign rating, right, then you can really assess the impact of the way the rating is done on African nations. Just one simple example. I'm from a country called Guinea, Republic of Guinea. It's the French one, so Conakry is the capital. And this country is endowed with large natural resources, okay? So it has 2/3 of the world reserves of bauxite, and today the country has the largest known deposit of iron ore that is about to start to be exploited next year, and it will bring about $20 billion. Actually, sorry, it's a $20 billion investment, but it would generate $2 billion every year for the foreseeable future. Now, a country like Guinea actually is not even rated right now, okay? It's a non-rated country. Now, we're talking about all these resources. You take mining companies like Rio Tinto, BHP Billiton, and others that have licenses to operate in these countries, okay? Those institutions are rated and listed in the capital markets. And by the way, the licenses they hold in my country, Guinea, in DRC and others, those licenses are worth billions because the reserves are actually accounted for in their financial statements. So any financial analyst is taking that into account to determine what's the value of the stock. So the stock in the capital market is reflecting the value of the reserves that are in the ground that are not exploited yet. Still, the African countries, including my country, Guinea, is not benefiting from that, right? From that sort of impact on the rating, right? So you don't have a rating there. Maybe other countries, they actually rated junk, if you look at it, because we're not taking into account those reserves, while the companies that are operating in those countries are listed and taking advantage of that. So just a quick illustration of how this whole rating system should change. And that affects cost of funding, right? Because if such countries go to the capital markets trying to raise funding, they look at the rating, right? If it's not appropriate, then the cost of funding is extremely exorbitant. So that needs to be fixed. Now, on your capital markets question, Patrick, resource mobilization is key for us. Shelter Afrique Development Bank has been actually mandated at the African Union Urban Forum last September actually, in Addis Ababa, as the anchor for resource mobilization in urban infrastructure and housing across the continent. So that's a key role we've been playing for 42 years anyways for this sector, but it was just reinforced again at the African Urban Forum last September. And we are looking at different ways of doing that, right? Through private capital mobilization, to public capital mobilization, and in between, blended finance as well. And that's really key. And we've been actually doing this, as I said, for many years. Where we sit here in Côte d'Ivoire, there is a capital market called BRVM, Stock Exchange. And BRVM has both equity, debt, and everything in between. And we have been issuing already 7 times in this market just to finance our projects in the West African Monetary Union countries, in CFA, which is the local currency, which is a regional currency. And we are about to actually come out with another issuance this year. I think I saw my treasurer in the room, which is he's probably run away, to actually discuss that issuance that we're about to also do, about $100 million, which will help us fund our projects in this region. And why I'm mentioning this is because in the context of today's international funding environment, it's really key for African countries and companies to generate local currency, right? So local source of funding. And we have pension funds, insurance companies, you name it, right? That can invest in instruments that will be issued in these capital markets. And that's exactly what we've been doing for years, and we'll continue doing it. Because housing for us is a local currency play. You can't really finance large-scale housing projects and developments and acquisition through hard currency. You really need to go local currency, and that's what we're doing. We've been issuing also in the Kenyan markets and other markets across Africa. And we'll do more of this, right, in local currency. Local resource mobilization is key so that we don't, always depend on foreign aid or foreign sort of investment. You really need to have local currency and local resources. And we have a lot of it, right? You look at a lot of these countries, Nigeria, Kenya here, the WAMU region, the pension funds and what they call in this region here, social security funds, are sitting on major, currency, but they don't know what to do with it, right? And a lot of it actually go into real estate that they try to manage, but that's not their expertise. So that's why we need to link up, right? Developers, financial institutions with the source of funding that comes from such institutions as pension funds and social security funds. So some of the areas that we are looking at nowadays in terms of innovation are the thematic bonds. So thematic bonds across different impact areas, because we all know impact investors are really hungry for impact sort of investments and some yield pickup with it. So we're looking at green, climate resilience sort of bonds, issuance, social bonds, and sustainability bonds. So obviously sustainability bonds are actually a mix of the green and the social. And the space we're in, affordable housing and urban infrastructure, is really actually a natural sector for social impact bonds that we'll be issuing. So this is one area that we'll be pushing, and we'll be listing those issuances on African and international capital markets for more visibility and transparency. And the second initiative that we are also looking at is the potential securitization and enhancing securitization. Now, before that, what Shelter Africa has done over the years is set up mortgage refinancing companies. In this region of the West African Economic and Monetary Union, WAMU, we have helped set up what we call CRRH. This is the Caisse Régionale de Refinancement Hypothécaire. This is a mortgage refinancing company of the 8 WAMU countries. It's a regional body that provides long-term funding to the banks so that the banks can provide long-term mortgages for retail investors, individuals, and families. So that's key for us to really lengthen the maturity of bond issuances in these markets through instruments like the CR-Rich that I just spoke about. We set up a similar product in a similar institution in Kenya, where we are based, by the way, for 42 years. This is KMRC, the Kenyan Mortgage Refinance Company. In Tanzania, the Tanzania Mortgage Refinance Company. And now these institutions take collateral, which are the mortgages issued by the banks, to on-lend to those banks, right? So what we can do as a next step, like I was saying earlier, is securitization. So you take actually those mortgages that have been issued and lump them in a security format and then sell them to investors, like insurance companies, pension funds. So these are areas that we're pushing. Third one, real estate investment trust to generate dividend and capital appreciation. And then credit enhancement and guarantees to really help de-risk and reduce the cost of bond issuances. Blended finance structures where we work with governments and government agencies. We provide sort of grants, technical assistance, but also first loss coverage from the subsidized funding, and then mobilize private funding on top of that to justify their returns. Other type of products are basically digital platforms as well that we're looking at, very key for crowdfunding. We all know that the diaspora wants to invest big time in housing in their countries. So having digital platforms to mobilize diaspora investments is key. So one of the things we did end of last year, we actually signed an agreement with the BRVM. This is the Bourse Régionale des Valeurs Mobilières, BRVM, based here in Abidjan, to actually develop financial instruments on the capital market here for the diaspora to invest in, and also develop basically resource mobilization for the housing sector in this region. So these are sort of some of the initiatives that we've been working on. But for us, this is really a multi-pronged approach, where we are really looking at product innovation, risk mitigation, and inclusive finance, right? To make sure that we mobilize not only new capital, but also generate equitable, sustainable, and long-term development goals. That's really what I wanted to say, but looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Habib. And I think you should clap for all the panelists. What I'm convinced about is the people who have the answers to our questions are here. So when we look about long-term financing in the continent, you know, these big guys here can certainly, you know, respond to that. We are left with 30 minutes of, you know, an interactive discussion. So allow me now to call on yourselves to ask any question, and I can see the appetite for questions.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. My name is Rolake Akikube-Fulani, and I work in investor relations and capital mobilization. So I have two questions. The first goes to Dr. John Bosco of PAPS. And whilst the aim of PAPS is to essentially reduce the dependence on foreign currencies like the dollar, one of the things I think is potentially missing is sort of a continent-wide FX pool. Because the real issue is really around the illiquidity and volatility of African currencies rather than just the issue of settlement. Because there's no sort of hedging mechanism or FX pool to deal with this. And I suspect that is probably one of the reasons you haven't seen wider adoption by commercial banks in Africa. So I would like you to address that issue. And then the second point, very briefly, perhaps to anybody here, really is around the Africa Credit Ratings Agency. I love the idea and the concept because it's all about democratizing access to capital markets. But how do we ensure that such a Pan-African initiative remains independent and credible and avoids political capture, right, in such a way that investors can see it as an efficient tool for pricing African risk? I know it's meant to be complementary to Moody's and S&Ps, and we've seen some of the errors You know, we have Kenya and Nigeria where they had to upgrade because they had downgraded too much. So I think this is usually a typical problem we see with these sorts of initiatives. So in terms of the governance protocols, the transparency standards, I don't know who on this panel is the main champion of that initiative, but it would be great to hear some thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies first, yes.
All right.
We're coming to you.
Okay, my name is Ini John Mekwam with Channels TV in Nigeria. I mean, it's part of what she just talked about. The credit rating is really, really interesting. But I'm scared because we've tried, even in ECOWAS, to have a common currency. It hasn't worked. We have AFCFTA. We're struggling with that. And this is relatively new for the people in Africa, but obviously something that we need to do because we've seen the weaknesses. So I'm just wondering, I don't know who's going to answer it, how we can ensure that this goes beyond talks and we can come against all those blurry lines that divides us on the continent. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Yes, here.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ruben Tamba. I am the first vice president of the African Youth Guarantee Fund and the CEO of UB Prima Logistics. My question goes to Mr. John Bosco. It's not a question as per se, but please, Mr. John Bosco, I think we have to step up the awareness of the PAPs. Because I am one of those persons who is actually on the ground for the implementation of the AFCFTA. And there is really a real-time problem as to the movements of funds. So if we have to be able to get PAPs go deep into the minds of Africans, a lot of awareness is supposed to be done as to PAPs. Because you mentioned Ghana. I will want to bet with you that if you get into Ghana today to find out from Ghanaians if they are aware about PAPs, sincerely, 70% of Ghanaians will tell you they don't know anything concerning PAPs. Not to talk of Nigeria, who actually does a lot of business transactions with Ghana. So please, we need to step up the awareness drive as to getting Africans to understand that there is a payment and settlement system presently on the ground to help to push for the implementation of the AFCFTA. Thank you.
Merci. Je m'appelle Ouattara Diakalia, je suis de l'initiative de la société civile pour l'objectif de développement durable en Côte d'Ivoire. Ma question s'adresse au, je n'ai pas retenu son nom, et le monsieur de la Guinée. Okay. Alors, vous avez dit en termes de mobilisation des ressources que les populations africaines ne contribuent pas suffisamment. Alors, ma question se trouve à deux niveaux. Dans un contexte de pauvreté exagérée, où le pouvoir d'achat des populations est très faible, selon vous, comment cette population peut contribuer à mobiliser des ressources? Ça, c'est la première question. Deuxième, la plupart de ceux qui se débrouillent sont dans l'informel, que ce soit dans l'agriculture, le transport et autres. Et donc, ils sont dans le secteur informel qui n'est pas tracé dans l'économie formelle. Alors, donc, ils préfèrent thésauriser l'argent que de mettre ça dans le circuit. Donc, selon vous, comment régler cette équation-là de thésaurisation de l'argent dans le secteur informel? Et enfin, dans cette même population, il y en a qui ont suffisamment d'argent, mais qui préfèrent aller les placer dans les banques européennes en Occident. Alors, comment faire en sorte que cet argent-là revienne servir l'Afrique? Maintenant, monsieur de la Guinée, vous avez dit qu'en termes de notation, que la Guinée n'est pas suffisamment prise en compte, mais par contre, Rio Tinto et autres. À quoi cela est dû? Est-ce que ces critères de notation-là n'ont pas une coloration politicienne? Voilà. Pourquoi les gens n'arrivent pas à prendre en compte le pays alors qu'on prend en compte des structures qui sont installées et qui utilisent ces réserves alors que le pays lui-même n'arrive pas à être pris en compte? Qu'est-ce qui justifie cela? Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Oui, madame.
Thank you very much. My name is Nana Mariam Yusuf. I work with Climate Reality Project, and I'm a Ghanaian. So before I ask my question, I want to address the concern of my brother here from Nigeria that I don't work for PABs, but as an average Ghanaian, I've heard advertisements on radio about PABs, and then some Ghanaian banks have incorporated that in their banking system. But my question is, how has it gotten to the local people on the ground? Because if you ask me, I mean, this is a lived experience. It is the PAPS system is only targeted at a particular number of people that are living in Ghana, for example, those that can speak and understand English, because the advocacy rate is only done in the English language. And so my concern is that how does this reach the local people on the ground? And secondly, when you're using PAPs from a country like Ghana, you know, there are several means of, the credit transfer and all of that. It's quite new, and then we are always asking ourselves, because when I want to use PAPs, the rating on it, is it favorable for me to be able to use it as an average Ghanaian, or it is still meant for the higher class of the society? So, you know, my concern is still around the local people in the community, for them to also have access to it, because we are looking at connection, we are looking at transfer, and it's not supposed to be only meant for the people at the top. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Anthony Himari. I work with Atidi. My question is on the rating agencies. Currently, we have some few African-based rating agencies in Africa. Augustus & Co. GSR was recently purchased by Moody's and some other few local rating. Why didn't they create a new one? Why don't we consolidate what we have already and make it stronger, rather than creating new rating agencies that my sister said that may not work or may work? Because again, acceptability is one thing that I've seen in Africa, where people don't accept a lot of these things and we create more problems and make it difficult for ourselves. Number two, today our problem with rating agencies is not only the rating agencies as well, it's the fact that we don't get transparent data from Africa. Most times you look at countries, they give you different data from the same country. That make it difficult for everyone to be able to truly tell the picture of this country. How can these rating agencies be able, how can we work with African countries to be able to be transparent in their data sharing? Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think there is one last hand. Okay, give to the gentleman, then we move to the other side. Thank you.
Thank you, that was a very interesting conversation. My question is to Mr. Habib. Two questions more specifically. I enjoyed your concept around how organizations that have licenses to extract minerals in countries can account that into their balance sheet. But as countries, there's no framework that can be used, especially Africa being a very resource-rich continent. I'm interested in your approach as to how we support governments to capture the value of the resources that they have, to leverage it in capital mobilization. And then secondly, on that crowdfunding model, you talked about an interesting concept on diaspora remittances becoming a very big source of capital to the country. I come from Kenya, and Kenya has around $4.8 billion in remittances that came in last year. And being able to tap into this market becomes very important, because I work in the climate space, and I'm trying to mobilize resources to come into the continent to support climate action projects. And I was interested in your approach. When you were talking about crowdfunding model, how has Shelter Afrique approached that element, and how successful have you been in doing that?
I am Kabanda Umal. I'm a consultant at the African Development Bank. My question is regards the political will of leaders in accepting most of the initiatives that are intended towards transforming the continent. The question is specifically targeted to PAPs. What political, looking at political will, what initiatives has PAP done to ensure that there is political will for such kind of systems to be accepted by all countries? Because without political will, it seems like it will just be a discussion. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And I think we have gathered all the questions. Now, let me turn to the panel. Habib, you took note of the questions, and I think there were specific questions that were addressed to you. So can you respond to that, and then we proceed? You have 5 minutes.
No, thank you very much. This is a very energetic room. I like the questions, a lot of questions and good ones. So just, I'm gonna tackle them in different orders. Huh? So on the point on, and I'm gonna switch to French because I think the question was asked in French. Par rapport à la mobilisation des ressources, vous avez parlé de la question de faibles revenus du secteur informel et le fait qu'il y a une fuite des revenus dans des pays étrangers. Vous avez absolument raison. Je pense que en termes de revenus faibles, vous savez, effectivement, nos pays comptent un secteur informel qui est très, très, très important. Je pense entre 70 et 90% de nos économies sont informelles. Donc, je pense qu'il faut absolument développer des mécanismes de prise en compte de ce secteur-là. Et nous pensons que dans le secteur de l'habitat et du développement urbain, c'est extrêmement critique. Et c'est ce que nous faisons aussi en développant des produits adaptés à ce secteur-là. Il faut qu'on forme, qu'on renforce la capacité des banques, des institutions financières à pouvoir prêter à ce secteur-là, pouvoir travailler avec ce secteur. Puisque quand on parle de revenus faibles, à la fin de la journée, c'est parce qu'on n'arrive pas à évaluer ces revenus-là. Parce que vous savez très bien que dans nos pays, c'est dans le marché principal du pays que l'économie tourne en fait. Hein. Vous allez chez nous en Guinée, c'est à Madina, le grand marché. C'est là-bas que vous avez vraiment une circulation énorme des fonds. Donc c'est un marché très informel qui n'a pas pris en compte dans le secteur formel. Donc je pense que mobiliser ces ressources-là, d'une façon ou d'une autre, va faire de la différence. Au niveau de la fuite des revenus à l'étranger, je pense que ça c'est quelque chose qui est aussi dû au fait que nous n'avons pas vraiment des mécanismes d'épargne qui marchent dans nos pays, des mécanismes qui puissent récupérer cette manne financière dans nos pays et investir. C'est pour ça que nous nous engageons non seulement sur le financement physique des bâtiments, financement physique du logement, mais aussi à développer des instruments financiers dans le secteur. Now I'm gonna go to the next question on how can we support governments, to capture mineral resources valuations, right? So I think this is something that's really key to understand how rating agencies work and establish basically a framework for collaboration between the different countries and the rating agencies. You know, I think countries can be more proactive in searching and looking to be rated and also understand how the rating systems work. From that perspective, they can also challenge, the rating agencies in terms of reflecting the real value of the assets, right? I don't think it's fair for a country to be sitting on all these resources and not benefit from the balance sheet, if you like, of the mining companies that are actually operating in these countries. So I think there could be also a collaboration, between the mining companies, those large institutions, with the different countries to make sure that this is something that is achieved. You mentioned the gentleman from Kenya. $4.8 billion of diaspora funding came to Kenya last year. We are based in Kenya, Nairobi as well. And we can see the Kenyan diaspora is very active. And taking it to the Africa level, you will see that actually we get about $95 billion every year coming to the continent. $95 billion, okay? So the question is, how do we harness those resources to go into productive areas, productive sectors? And we all know that being in the diaspora, we all were dreaming or are dreaming of owning a home in our countries. And like my brothers in Nigeria would say, you send the money and they chop the money, so you don't see the color of that house, right? So I think for us, creating platforms to harness and receive this large-scale funding from the diaspora and putting it in productive areas would increase even further the 95 billion to a much bigger number, because people will see actually that they can get access to the real assets on the continent. And then the climate space also can be linked to that. As we all know, green climate resilience is a priority area for many institutions, and we can also generate funding through that. The crowdfunding mechanisms are pretty well known in different other areas and sectors, but I think leveraging digital platforms is actually the most productive and newer ways of doing this properly. So from our perspective, this is an area of growth, and we are definitely looking forward to develop it further. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And you can see that your responses are approved by the people. So, Jide, what is your take on the questions? They were excellently, so eloquently presented. So what do you say in 5 minutes?
Thank you so much for the questions. I think I should just maybe touch on the question on the credit ratings, the African Credit Ratings Agency. Is it needed in Africa? Absolutely yes. And the fact that it was endorsed by the African Union is a boost. The political legitimacy that the African Union comes with, and I don't work for the AU, is one that is unparalleled on the African continent. Should it be associated and embedded within the AU as an organ? Absolutely no. And I think this is really very important in trying to understand the value that the African Credit Rating Agency brings. Should it also replace, say, the credit ratings of, say, the top 4 or big 4 companies, rating agencies? Certainly not. But it definitely has a role to play. And what role do we see here? In 1985, what we call Afrexim Bank was initially inspired through the modest contribution of UNDP. Most people don't know this. The feasibility study that led to the establishment of Afrexim Bank was largely done by UNDP. Today, UNDP has no business with Afrexim Bank. Of course, we continue to collaborate. So the point to be made is that in setting up, in constituting the African Credit Rating Agency, you do need partners. You do need partners like the African Union. You do need partners like UNDP, but the independence of this credit rating agency must be assured. Now, how can the independence be assured? I think there are different ways in which that can be done. The way we constitute the steering committee, ensuring that qualified people are hired for the positions as opposed to candidates that are nominated by member states. I think these are some of the factors that we need to really focus on. My last point is really about how do we ensure the functional value of the African credit rating agencies. I think the first point here is that our countries need capability development, not capacity development. The capabilities of those that are able to gather data, that are able to negotiate with credit rating agencies, that are able to support government in terms of the discussions around how to alter the methodology must be upskilled. And this could be one of the primary mandates of the African Credit Agency. So it should not necessarily be focused largely on providing an alternative rating for African countries. That is important, but we cannot replace, for various structural reasons or structural constraints, we cannot replace the top 4. My very last point is that we have seen from our engagement with countries that it is also very useful to exchange best practices and lessons. right? And this is one of the reasons why at UNDP we are working to establish this community of practice, which I mentioned earlier. I think there is value in using the African Credit Rating Agency as a space for exchanging best practices across countries. And most importantly, as I end, I think the previous speaker talked about the fact that not all countries have even been rated, right? With the African Credit Agency, we can have all 55 AU member countries rated. And I think this is an important point to make. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me go straight to you, Pierre. And you've listened to the questions. You have 5 minutes.
I think most of them were addressed to PAPS, and UNDP has given justice. So did Asheta Afrique. But I want to add maybe one small thing on the question asked in French. There's one part which is financial literacy, very, very important. Ça ne veut pas dire que les gens n'ont pas d'argent. Ils en ont. Matter of fact, when you go across Abidjan, you see a lot of businesses, restaurants, bars, and all that. Those people make money. So it doesn't mean they don't have money, but the channel through which they use their propensity money leaves a lot to be desired. So we don't have markets that are attractive, maybe enough to them, but they can be. Our economies are growing everywhere in Africa, every country except maybe those who are in wars and all that, they're all growing. The economies are growing across the sectors. So I think that money can be mobilized easily if we put the right instruments in place and the right technology. You know, technology is very important, you know, because it trickles down, it enables a lot to be happening in our economies by raising that money. So Africa can raise all the money it wants domestically. By domestic, I mean a pension fund in Nigeria can fund projects in Namibia, or a pension fund in Tanzania can fund projects in Botswana. So it's very, very simple. All we need is to put the right instruments in place and remove the barriers, you know, the non-tariff barriers that we have, and the settlement issues can be sorted also, I mean, with PAPs and all that. So I think that one is possible. But even the smallest people, if they are taught the right way, they will do that. They all have tontines in their neighborhoods. You understand? So they have all, we call that imimina in Rwanda. You know, so there are so many out there in the neighborhoods. That means these people understand what capital is, they understand what mobilizing capital is, but if they channel it through the right productive environment, it would happen if we do add a little bit of more financial literacy and the right technology. That's the one I wanted to add quickly. On the credit rating agency, I think it's a good idea to have something, but we must change a lot in how we do it. And the way it is structured will be very important. It can't be politically driven from Addis Ababa. It must be really private sector, but supported by governments and other multilateral organizations. And we have also to loop in, I believe, the existing ones on the continent in that mix. I think can make some difference if we look at what these people are doing and try not to create another big ghost white elephant institution, because they happen like that. How long ago did we talk about the Central Bank of Africa? I think those times on 94, there is a central bank coming for Africa. There is also a common market union coming, a monetary union coming in East Africa, where I come from. The target was 2025. Now we have shifted it to 2031. What does that tell you? We must also be serious about what we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Bosco.
unfortunately, I got 80% of the questions, and I'm given 20% of the time. But that's not a problem. I'll answer them very well. You touch on a very good point on the pool of Forex. To date, 80% of the transactions done within African countries, in between African countries, are settled and paid out of Africa. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us two things. That actually the banks, and this is how it's done, our banks have got settlement accounts outside of Africa, which they use to settle those transactions. So we cannot solve all the problems of African cross-border payments at once. But what PAPS and Afrexim Bank have done is that, look, can we have, we started off by having central banks put up the settlement funds for their economies. Then we said, no, this is not also because you're constraining their reserves. Now, commercial banks use their own settlement funds, and we call that the commercial bank settlement model, which actually has gained a lot of traction, which means commercial banks are doing what they are doing today, what they've been licensed to do payments, but let them concentrate, let them open the settlement accounts within Africa, within the Afrexim Bank. So that we can now use that to settle the African transactions and pay them instantly. How do we do this? The Forex has been here with us for years, for decades. We've used Forex to do our business in Africa. So we cannot break it in a minute, in 1 second. So what we've done is that we have a multilateral net settlement system, whereby if country X is trading with country Y, the balance, because the trading balance is across African countries, so the difference is the one that is settled in dollars in our books. That at the outset reduces the mobilization, the need to mobilize for Forex for the net importers, and for the net exporter, then you don't even have, don't need any Forex in that regard. But in terms of the Forex pool, Afrexim Bank has put a maximum of $3 billion for when perhaps across all the countries in Africa, for the banks to be able to tap in, to be able to settle. And for now, where we are in the WAMS region, it's around $500. So this is how we've tried to tackle that Forex issue, so that we can have at least the 80% of the transactions being settled out are coming out settled in Africa. Now, in terms of getting the Forex burden also to completely go away at some point in time, we are working on an exchange rate mechanism so that our currencies can be able to be converted into each other easily. But that's the study we are doing. We have to look at trade flows, we have to look at and for overtime, and then be able to determine what's the kind of exchange rate mechanism we can use. So it's a way of having a kind of a unit of account to be able to apply within between African currencies. So that's what we are doing towards that issue. And there are, as I said, a multitude of, it's a myriad of issues, but we'll go one by one. So that's where we are perhaps in terms of your question. There was a question on awareness. Certainly, I cannot agree more with you. We need awareness. We need to have this done. Now, PAPS is a B2B kind of system. So we work with banks who are dealing with clients directly to be able to create awareness. What we do, once a bank signs up and is ready to transact, we start to communicate to the market. And this, we don't work with only one bank. We'll usually also engage the bankers associations and the central banks to be able to do this. Our process is that once we go into a market, we have a roadshow to tell the banks that here we are, you can use us. And now, together with the banks, we communicate to the markets. Certainly, awareness is not it's not an event. It's a continuous process. So this is what we do, and we work with also media companies to be able to promote PAPS in this. And I'll touch on that with also the following question that came from the madam behind you about penetration. It's about penetration. How does the local person be able to use this? We've had discussions with Sierra Leone, for instance, with one of the banks, and how do we now capture that message in local languages? Let's appreciate that Africa has got many local languages. So when you go to a country, you ask, well, in Kenya it's much easier, or in many countries much easier, to say, well, we can put this message in one Swahili. We can put it in one, in Rwanda, we can put it in Kinyarwanda, just one. So I can go to Rwanda and just market it in Kinyarwanda, where I come from anyway. But if you go to a country that has multiple languages, so we normally work with officials to say, well, which is the most spoken language or business language or that we can apply and be able to communicate to the maximum number of people conveniently, because there's value in communicating in a local language. That means you actually identifying yourself with the people. So that's very important. And the other that you touched on about how does the PABs not meant for the middle class. No, PABs meant for everyone. And that's the reason we are now adopting channels, digital channels, so that everyone can access PABs. So that PABs becomes a household name in Africa. And this is what we're building to date, to see how do we now sell PABs to the local people. We started off as trade facilitators. Yes, we facilitate trade. But trade is not in goods only. Trade is also in services. If you have your child being educated in another country and you're sending pocket money, for instance, or you're working in one country and you're sending a remittance, to us that's a payment, and we facilitate that. So anyone can access PABs, and that's why it has been brought to you from your banks to your mobile phones. There was a question on political will from the AFDB staff. PABs has got, I think, the biggest political will, right from day one. When the SFT agreement was signed in Kigali in 2018, subsequently the following year in July in Niger, heads of state met to now implement the secretariat. The decision was taken that the Pan-African payment system should be implemented by Afreximbank, which actually has it in its own charter. It has been mandated by all the signatories to facilitate payment arrangements. But it was further reiterated by the heads of state, AU heads of state, all of them, that together with the SFTA Secretariat, they should set up the Pan-African payment and settlement system. And they further reiterated on this when they met in South Africa in December of that very year, 2019, to say, where are we with PABs? Afreximbank, tell us where you are with PABs. So we have a huge political support. Now, below the political support of heads of state, we have the central banks. And thus, to date, we deal with the African Association of African Central Banks to be able to now drive it to the banks and to everyone. A payment system of this magnitude cannot operate without a mandate from regulators, or to be at least acknowledged and designated as a designated payment system within the markets. So ASCB, as we call it, we are in collaboration with them to be able to drive this at the lowest level. And our governing structure is that to date we have what we call the PABs Governing Council. That is constituted by all governors of central banks who are members. And we're encouraging every other joining member to join that, so that we have this supported by the technical stroke political level. Because the highest heads of state is a purely political level, but the central banks come in with the political, but also with the technical support that we can receive. So I think that I can stop there, unless there's any other that hasn't come in.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks to all the panelists. I think they have been excellent, and they have been so eloquent in responding to the questions that were asked. And for that, I would like to maybe beg your indulgence in clapping again for the excellent work. So now, in terms of concluding the panel, what I want to stress on behalf of the African Union is that I don't want to say we are at a crossroad, but I will say it. We have today the firm conviction and belief that time has come for Africa to transform. When you look at the sky, for those who wake up at night, just try to go out and look up and see the promises that the continent is putting forward. If you listen carefully to the message that you can hear from the sky, you will see that time is ripe for things to happen. Time is ripe for Africa to transform. And on this, when you listen to the conversation that we just have, had now, you will see that there is an essential word that should be at the center of our, our thinking, which is trust. Let's trust our institutions. That's the first thing, because trust is certainly not there. The political will that we spoke about is there, but the problem is, are citizens trusting the process that we are all putting together? And that is where the answer should be. It shouldn't be the high-level political will, because using PAPs will never be an affair of a head of state or anything. It is about us, small people down here. For the African Union, we have committed to support all these processes, and I don't think PAP has been adopted by the heads of states who have mandated Afrexim Bank to actually implement it, and we are working towards that. The Pan-African Stock Exchange project, which is part of the financial architecture of the continent, was adopted in 2006, and we are moving towards that. The only key word, as I said, that we need to keep in our minds is trust. Are we trusting the system enough? Because there are leaders in this room. There are ministers, certainly central bank governors, and also small people like me and you. So the key question is, are we trusting the system? You heard about Shelter Afrique Development Bank with the excellent work they are doing in terms of housing, Africans, building infrastructure. Do we trust that institution enough to actually put our resources there? That's the question we should ask ourselves, because in this room, I am sure there are institutional investors that need to understand that we need to trust the process. The UNDP spoke about the credit rating agency that we need to put in place. The question is, again, about trust. I say this because if we go in the debate of asking ourselves, what will be the credibility of the African Credit Rating Agency? Will it be, an effective institution and all those things? That is just a discussion. But actually, the fundamental thing that we have to do is to trust the process and to implement the decision of African heads of states who have, in 2022, decided that time is ripe for an African credit rating agency, and that time is now. So let's trust the process, my sister. Let's trust the process, my brother. Let's have faith in this continent that we will leave to our kids, to our sons, to our daughters. Let's make sure that when they sit here in the next 10 years, I see my sister from Development Reimagined, Anna, when our kids will sit here in 10, in 20 years, they have to be mindful of the fact that we have taken the right decisions and that we have effectively implemented those decisions. For us, at the African Union, we will not spare any effort to make sure that we are able to achieve the transformation of this continent. PAPS, we created it. The Pan-African Stock Exchange, we are on it. We signed an excellent MOU with Shelter Afrique Development Bank last year. We have MOUs with institutions such as Development Reimagined, and we are working with the UNDP and working with various institutions that are in the room. Our aim is to achieve Agenda 2063, and I see my sister, she's sitting here. Agenda 2063 is our collective response to Africa's challenges, because we need to build a united, a peaceful, a prosperous, but more importantly, an African continent that speaks loudly in the global stage. And that is our aim, and we will lead you there. Thank you very much.